Hi, I'm Trish from TrishNewbery.com and welcome to the sew along for the Briar bias slip gown. So this is a slinky bias cut garment, which means it's going to hug the curves. It's an absolute joy to wear. It's a very simple sew, but you do need to make sure that you notch and you match your notches as you go. So this is designed for woven fabrics. Choose a woven fabric that's soft and drapey, so I'd suggest a silk or a satin, something quite nice, medium weight is good. A crepe would be wonderful as well. I've designed the Briar to match with the Briar robe, but you could actually sew this in a cotton as well if you wanted to, or a linen, and wear it as a summer dress. Would look great layered over the top of a t-shirt as well. But for the purposes of this, I've called it a nightgown. So it's a nice long one, it's going to hug the body beautifully, and it's just a pleasure to sew and easy to wear. Okay, so it's a woven fabric. We're using 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowances, and it's quite a quick sew, so let's just get straight into it, and we're going to start off with the bust. So let's start with the bust cups. So we have a pair of pieces, which means 2 mirrors. One's cut out like this and one's been cut out like that. You'll notice one edge is straight and there are notches here. So this is actually going to be folded back like that in a moment. The first thing we need to do is go to our serger, our overlocker, and just overlock tidy the straight edge on both of these pieces. Just the raw edge. We don't want to cut any fabric off when we do our serging. We just want to tidy up that edge and get rid of any fraying. And I should have mentioned that I'm only using 3 threads when I overlock. I'm doing a wide serge. I'm using my left needle and my 2 lower needles, so I've just got rid of the narrower one. Okay, so when you have serged that edge, what we're going to do is go to our iron, and we are going to fold at that top and bottom notch point and press that into position like so on both pieces. Now, making sure there's a nice, fresh, new, sharp needle in our sewing machine, we're going to stitch directly through that serging line. Now, you don't have to use a serger, you could use a zigzag, whatever on your home sewing machine, whatever you prefer. And I'm going to do that for both pieces. And just go and give that another press just to bed those stitches in. So this fold line is essentially our centre front. What we're going to do now is run gathers between the notches here. So I'm just going to do them with my regular machine. You can do sew gathers whichever way you prefer. Some people like to do 2 rows. What I'm going to do is just lengthen my stitch length from normal. And I'm going to take some extra thread out, and I'm going to stitch a line at 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. Well, it's just short, it's only just slightly short of that amount. And then I'm going to take some extra length and cut. And now from the back I'm going to draw a thread up. Remembering when we gather we only ever take threads from one side. So I'm going to take mine from the back. And at the moment I'm just giving it a rough draw up. It's no set measurements here yet. So when we have gathers ready to go on one cup, we're going to do exactly the same thing for the other piece. Okay, before I go any further, I'm putting my stitch length back to normal. And when I'm sewing with a satin or any of these slinky fabrics, I do tend to make my stitch length just slightly longer than normal, and normal for me is around 2.5. So put your stitch length back to normal. Also, you're probably wondering what fabric I'm sewing with today. So this is a polyester satin. It's called Super Satin. It looks like one of the cheaper nasty dance satins, but it's actually a really nice heavy weight. I would suggest with this pattern, even something like a delustered satin would be absolutely beautiful, something that's a little bit heavier. So take your garment, and making sure we have the right cup, bearing in mind that the fold is towards the centre, we're going to place this right sides together, and you'll see 2 notches here in the cups. They will match to the notches that we have here. So what we're going to do is sew a seam at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to distribute those gathers evenly as we sew. So when satins are really slippery, the easiest thing is just to start and worry about getting everything into place afterwards, because it sort of works like another pair of hands, especially on slippery fabrics. So we're going to sew as far as the first notch, and make sure your seam allowance is perfect. So with this garment, it's a really good idea, double check your cutting. Cutting is really important. Okay, so now we are going to distribute the gathers evenly, making sure that our beginning and our end points match. So there's my end point there. My needle's already holding in my start point, and all I'm going to do is just draw these up and loosen them off wherever I need to get a lovely fit. And I'm going to stitch directly on top of my gathers. Well, it's just to the side. The key when I'm doing this is I don't usually remove my gathering thread, so I try and stitch just to the side of it. Now, some of my gathering thread has just come out at the end. Okay, so now I'm going to keep stitching at 1 centimetre seam allowance, and when we get to the end we want the fold here to be exactly 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch in on the stitch line. It'll all become very clear in a moment. There we are, and we want to stop and back tack. So that's one side done. Now we're going to go and overlock or serge tidy that. And now we're going to take the other piece and do the same thing. When we sew this on, we want this piece here to be exactly joined, so be very careful when you place it. We want that stitch line to meet at exactly the right place. We don't want there to be a little gap. So place the fold line so that you're stitching, and it might not be right to the edge of the fabric, so just place it so that when you start stitching there won't be a gap. That's what you want. You want a perfect join in the middle like that. So go ahead and overlock or tidy up that edge, and you can remove those gathering stitches if you want. Clearly with the satins, they're really easy to remove if you want to do them. To make sure this sits really nicely, what we're going to do now is just edge stitch the area between the stitching. So the best thing to do is come to the back and trim off your serge thread to about 1 inch, 2 or 3 centimeters. And I want you to tuck that serge thread underneath so it's hidden and sandwiched in there, and just make sure that that seam is all pressed down. You don't necessarily need to use your iron yet. Then we're going to come to one side, and starting where we finished the stitching on the cup, stitch up. So it's really just a pin width away from the seam till we come to the very centre of the point. Stop with your needle down in your work, lift, turn and pivot, and stitch down to the same position on the other side. So that way the front of our garment will always sit just nicely down. Go ahead and press that. Right, so take your front and your back and place them right sides together, and we are going to sew the side seams. Because this is bias cut, things will move, so be very careful. The more expensive your fabric, the less problem you will have. Don't stretch it as you sew, just treat your fabric with a very light hand. So let's start at the top. So you're going to have a little triangle overlap, because what we want to do is make sure we start stitching at the 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch line, and that's where we want the fabric to match, not the raw edge. So start with your little triangle overlap and sew a couple of back tack stitches. Now we have a notch. That notch will match to the seam. Make sure that that seam faces down towards the hem, and sew to that point. And then match your next notch and sew to that point. Now, because it is a bias cut garment, what you'll find is this gown is quite forgiving. If you cut it too big, it'll probably be alright, it'll just slip into place. If you cut it too small, it might be a different story. Okay, so match your next notch and sew, and just take your time doing this, don't stretch it. Forget to back tack at the end, and then sew the other side seam. Okay, so go to your overlocker and tidy up those edges. Okay, so while we're at the overlocker, I'm going to overlock tidy my hem, making sure that my seams face towards the back when I do this. With bias cut garments, especially the hem's on a curve, so a narrow hem is a really good idea. So I've allowed for a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch hem, so I'm going to overlock and stitch it down. You could also do a rolled hem if you wanted to. I find that it could be a little bit problematic, but you choose. So what I'm going to do is just overlock tidy the raw edge, and then I'm going to press it up by 1 centimetre. And when I press, I'm also going to press the side seams at the same time. I've pressed the side seams, I've pressed the hem up. Now I've said I've allowed for a 1 centimetre hem. With these, the narrower the better. So if you are using a serger and it's say 6mm, 1/4 inch wide, try and do your hem at that width. The narrower the hem, the less puckering, the better the result will be. So I'm going to stitch the hem into place, and I'm going to start on a side seam, and I'm going to sew mine from the right side, just because I feel that I can control the look of it better. And sometimes the stitching just looks better from the right side. Shouldn't really make a difference, but sometimes it does. Okay. So you can see I've got a little bit of tunneling roping going on, so I'm just going to, when I stitch it, I'm just going to release the tension every few stitches, well maybe every inch, and then after I'm finished what I'll do is I'll press that into place, and hopefully all that tunneling will press out. Now we're working on these straps. So the top of this garment is finished with binding, so you need to purchase a woven binding, or you could cut your own. Now for my machine I have a binding attachment, and you can buy these for domestic sewing machines. So what it does is you cut your binding to the correct width. For me this is a 30mm 1 3/16 of an inch binder set 1. And when you feed this through, this will automatically create the binding for you. You can also buy attachments like separate little machines that will make binding for you. So I've put a suggested length of binding in on the information sheet, so have a look at that. So when you've decided what sort of binding you want to work with, what we're going to do is we're going to start on the left front as if you wear it. So the very first thing we need to do, no matter whether you're using a binding attachment like this or you're sewing binding, we need to stitch together a length of binding to be the first strap that starts at the back. So you're going to need about 18 inches or 45 centimetres, and don't skint on this because you don't want to have to unpick and do it again, but that's a good starting point. So what I'm going to do here is just stitch through a length. I'm going to take my tape measure, just measure up that amount. So this is going to be the first strap that comes from the back. So I need to get to about there. So So certainly do more if you're concerned, but that's a really good starting point, a minimum of 18 inches. Right, so now I'm going to take my garment, so this is the left front as if I wear it, and I'm going to start attaching my binding here at the edge of the fold. And it's really important when you start that you get a really good start point. Now if you have any ragged edges like that, just trim them off before you begin. I also find my long handled tweezers really good for this, so I want to make sure when I do start this off, I want to tuck that beginning point and make sure it's pushed right up to catch properly. And we want to cover that notch too that was the fold. So then just start stitching around. And you can tell here that I've got a little bit of unevenness going on, so what I'm going to do is just trim this all to suit. I'm going to leave that tail just slightly long. I don't want to risk that unraveling, and I'll just smooth this off. I mean, some of this will be hidden, but I'm just being a bit particular, and I'll keep stitching through. So you'll be doing this, if you're doing it just with your regular binding, you'll just stitch it on as per normal. So what I'm going to do with that is just tuck that under to make sure it's all caught. Oh, and if you're interested, when you do put binding into an attachment like this, you set it up with the wrong side of the binding towards you. Okay, so we're going around the back. Just try not to stretch the back out too much. It does have a curve. Right, so when we get to the other side of the front, what we need now is a strap the same length as our first strap here. So just stitch off another 18 inches, 45 centimeters or so, or you could just make this side match this side. So to do that, all I'm going to do is match those positions and go along until my straps are around about the same length. Okay. So what is a really good idea now is to cut the strap length back to the same length, because when you go to try this on, it's really hard to adjust it if you haven't started with them the same length. So just match the points here and push them together like so. And it really doesn't matter how much you can trim off later, just trim them off at the same position like that. Now it's a matter of taking that strap and attaching it at the back. So what I suggest you do is pin this into place and then just go and try it on. If you pin them, well, stitch this on the inside. If you pin them both, often you'll find that one side will be shorter than the other. That's why I tend to cut the straps the same length before I begin. So if you do find one shorter than the other, just take the average of the two and stitch it that way. So on this side I have got 12.5 centimeters, 5 inches, and on this side I have got 13 centimeters, which is 5.25 inches. So I'll just pull that back to 12.5, 5 inches on both sides to stitch that down. So all I'm going to do is find on the pattern there's a mark which says chalk only, so you will have chalked on your fabric the position of the straps, but of course you can change this. So it's just a matter now of making sure the strap's on the inside and at right angles, like so, and then just stitching it down through the existing line of stitching on your binding tape. And then you can just trim off the excess underneath to about 1 inch, 2 or 3 centimeters. So make sure you do it on both sides. And well done, your garment is finished very fast, so I really hope you enjoy this. This is just delightful to wear. It does hug the body, and it's also very flattering, as bias cut garments are at the same time. So thanks for joining me with this video. If you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up and also the subscribe button if you haven't done already. And as always, thank you so much for buying my patterns and supporting a small business, and I hope to see you back again soon.